Ontario and BC are Canada's most expensive real estate markets, but homes in both those provinces are actually cheaper now than they were a year ago. Coming from a new report put out by Royal LePage. For more on that, let's go to Phil Soper. He's president and CEO at Royal LePage. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
So this is pretty interesting. I'm wondering what you're seeing in these markets, Toronto and Vancouver specifically, and why we're seeing a drop in prices. Is it just straight demand? There isn't as high demand?
It's driven by the much higher prices we see for homes in these two cities. There's some local things that are changing the picture. In Toronto, for example, we have a large number of completions in large condo projects, so there is a flood of supply last year, this year, that's temporary. But it's all related to people's comfort with making a major decision in this environment. And the more expensive the decision, the more uncomfortable people get. And
it's not just the purchase of the home, but these markets like Toronto, you have a lot of property tax you have to sort of factor into your finances. And I'm wondering if people take that into consideration, other costs in these busy cities that make it less affordable?
Yeah, we did dive in this time and ask people for more insight into what was driving their attitudes. About half the people said the current economic environment wasn't impacting their decision, that they would move ahead. Half said they would not. Now, only a third of those said it was affordability related. And we did ask about not just housing affordability, but the cost of living overall. So if you back out of those numbers, it's about 17% that say affordability is a big issue. The big issue in our expensive cities is just uncertainty. The same thing, driving CEO, capital investment, travel.
Okay, let's talk about Montreal and Quebec City, because there were some huge upswing for prices in both of those cities. And what are you seeing happening there?
Well, number one, they're the most optimistic people in the country. It's shocking how different, for example, Alberta and Quebec are. In Quebec, 65% of people say they are very optimistic about their economic situation.
Where do they live? Where are they living?
I was saying to my the guy who runs our Quebec operations for us today, I said, do people not listen to the news? I thought maybe they're not on Fox.
Yeah.
So, and he said, well, there's a little bit of that, but no, tariffs are all the talk, Trump's all the talk. They just, economically, it has been a good few years in Quebec.
Okay, so outside of both Quebec City, Montreal, or Quebec, are there prices rising elsewhere that are of note?
Everywhere except Vancouver and Toronto.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we're seeing Atlantic Canada we came into 2025 expecting our forecast built in 2024 showed it to be the strongest year since that pandemic boom. All the fundamentals, people's savings, dropping borrowing costs, low default rate on mortgages, and pent-up demand because we had that post-pandemic correction. Everything was pointed to a very boisterous year. And it is unfolding, maybe on a muted basis, in the prairies, Atlantic Canada, Quebec, but in southern Ontario and the lower mainland of BC, Greater Vancouver, things are stunted.
Okay. You have mentioned it's a market shaped by caution.
Yes.
Is it more than that, do you think, or is caution it?
Well, affordability is definitely playing in, but not in the way we typically think of it in Canada, where it's been 30 years since people have had wages and salaries rising at a faster rate than underlying cost of housing. We're over 3 years now where every month the overall cost of housing relative to incomes has improved. So homes have been getting more affordable for 3 years now, and that is playing, and people see it as a window of opportunity, and you have to decide if you're in the wary or the brave category in terms of whether you want to make a move at this particular time.
Okay, so we've been talking about prices, where homes are doing well, where they're not. I'm wondering, since spring is usually a very busy time for real estate, how would you characterize the start of the spring season in Canada?
very slow overall, driven by the huge impact that the Golden Horseshoe has on overall transactions in Canada. It's just such a populous area, and it's been quite down. The volume of homes, home prices are virtually flat, but down a couple of points. But the volume of homes trading hands has been quite low. So that has put a damper on the overall numbers. But we are expecting a delayed, call it a kickoff to the spring market. If you think of 2020 and the adjustment that people made to we had no vaccines or anything in 2020, but people adjusted to the fact, oh, I'm going to keep my job. I do need a home. Oh, I can be safe to get out there. And we saw by the end of 2020 a lift in the market, despite the fact that there were clouds and uncertainty. I think there's an adjustment period that's going to happen here, and we'll see more people. I'll give you one data point that I just got right before we came on air. Visits to our website. It's the busiest real estate company website in the country. We're up 20% week over week. So we typically get that in early March.
I was going to say. Okay.
So that doesn't, my CFO would say, show me the money.
Yeah.
But as a optimistic CEO, I say activity leads to change.
Okay, so if you're a buyer or an investor at this time, a buyer or seller, excuse me, how would you advise each?
Well, you can look around, you can shop, because interest rates, even if they don't go down tomorrow, they are going to get cheaper, and home prices are relatively flat. I don't think you're going to see much of a dip in home prices this year. There's just we have a housing shortage in this country, and it's created a floor on house prices. And of course, it depends where you live. In some places, prices are actually rising modestly. So take your time, put those conditions on financing in your offer if you feel you need them, get a home inspection, and don't feel rushed. Canadians typically in our big cities always rushed
of course,
to buy, and now is a bit of a window of clarity or calm in a tumultuous world.
Yeah, you don't have to sign on the dotted line as soon as you see the house.
Exactly.
Thanks very much for coming in. Phil
My
Soper
pleasure.
is the president and CEO at Royal LePage.